Hey guys, if any of you watched yesterday, you'll know I did another Q&A because I didn't really have very much time to produce videos at the moment, and that's pretty much the same today as well. However, there was a little bit of news, and this is a topic I mentioned yesterday as well. I want to spend a bit of time discussing with you guys, and that's the idea of masteries, and what the hell the game could continue expanding with them in the future of Guild Wars 2. So here's what I said yesterday. I'll reiterate the point that Heart of Thorns is an expansion with some content, yes, but also in many ways ArenaNet finding their feet and realizing how they can renewably make lots of expansions way off into Guild Wars 2's future that people find fun to play because they continue our post-level 80 progression, and they have two systems specifically for that. They have specializations, which are incredibly easy to speculate. We have a strict set of rules that can be bent. For example, this first set of specializations seem to only be giving characters existing sets of utilities, and at that, existing sets of utilities that probably already have runes associated with them as well. And they also are giving people one new weapon. That weapon currently already exists in the engine. But with future specializations, you know, those rules can be twisted slightly. Maybe they can add entirely new classes of utility skills for the Gen 2 stuff. Maybe they can add entirely new weapons or move weapons to new slots. It's easy to think about. It's fun to think about. And it really seems like a big winner for me in terms of a lot of hype about future expansions. In fact, if you look, a poll was done recently. What are you excited most about for Heart of Thorns? You know, it had stuff on there like Stronghold, the new Wild vs. Wild, Desert Borderlands, and by and large, overtaking everything else were specializations. Everyone was saying specializations, but what they were excited about with the expansion. That's because it's a really good feature. It's an expandable feature, and it's something that we're really going to enjoy when the expansion comes. But that isn't the only thing. It is supposed to be paired with masteries. That's going to be the topic of the video today. And so I realized this a while ago actually, that specializations, yes, they may be very easy to speculate about, but masteries, not so much. And I wonder whether that's to the detriment of the system. I wonder then whether this is why we are so excited about our elite specializations coming up, but not so much about masteries, not so much about that post-level 80 progression. And honestly, if you wrote the two of them down on paper, wouldn't you say that it's the post-level 80 progression that is more important to your average MMO player? Your average MMO player is usually looking at an expansion for a level cap raise and that kind of stuff, and they want to feel like they continue building characters. The number one reason that I see people quit the game, close friends, distant friends, people I hardly even know that leave posts on the forums, they all say, I got to level 80, I didn't know what to do. It didn't feel like I was getting anywhere once I hit that point. Now, to an extent, specializations resolve that issue too. People are going to be leveling all the way through the game now, specifically because they know at 80 they get this new elite specialization, and if ArenaNet design the system correctly with the hero points, which we'll see this weekend whether they do or not, those players will then continue to play that character at level 80, actually unlocking that final track, unlocking the last of the traits, unlocking the utility skills, the new weapon, all that kind of stuff. And so with all of this, then people are kind of encouraged to stay for a little bit longer, but only a little bit longer, not a crazy amount longer. And that's where masteries step in. That's where masteries are trying to make Guild Wars 2 feel a little bit more like these other MMOs where, you know, some of them are even so grindy it feels like there isn't a level cap. The rarity of seeing someone at level cap is this insane thing to behold. And I'm not saying that they're going to try and make it impossible to max out all masteries, but the fact that when we hit level 80 now, the little number above our characters is no longer 80, which everyone dismisses anyway, is now your mastery points, and is now actually kind of replacing that idea and becoming more like in other MMOs where you see people at high level. It says something about the system. It says this should be an important system. It says it should be something where you get very excited about. So why aren't we? Why is it that now, this week, a Periscope video went up? Periscope being a service I'd never seen before today, but there you go. Is this what feeling old is like? This is a Periscope thing from ArenaNet at Gamescom tomorrow. They're going to be talking about some stuff for Guild Wars 2. A lot of us have been thinking it's the hardcore endgame content. When it was revealed in this, it's basically a Masteries talk. Now, don't misunderstand that. Masteries, most times they have ever mentioned Masteries, and most times they have ever mentioned hardcore content, they've paired them hand in hand. They've said, oh, this is going to be really difficult stuff. You need to go through like a lot of progression. You need to get these masteries to complete. And you can even see in examples of the way they designed the Wyvern. They kind of say, they showed us the Wyvern a while ago, and they said, all right, this is the first Wyvern, and this is kind of just a baby Wyvern. And you can already see that Wyvern is reliant on masteries. It can knock you off. It will push you off of this platform. And if you don't have the mastery to be able to glide, or even perhaps glide and like enter these slipstreams, platforms, you are not really going to be able to complete that content. And then they talk about how, you know, there'll be smaller platforms, and then there can be boss fights that require you to bounce around on mushrooms to get to various airs, or even just raw combat affecting masteries, like, hey, this guy is going to do loads of poison damage to you that you need to reduce, or you need to be able to do more damage to him with a certain mastery. So these two systems are integral. I don't know whether we're going to get extreme information on the hardcore in-game stuff itself. Whether we'll get extreme information on it at all before launch is, I guess, is up to debate. But we will get the mastery set of things. So I'm expecting a lot of elaboration. I want to go through you guys with what we already know. Now, two core things about masteries that I do want to state. Though they can affect combat, they're not as extreme as, okay, this mastery will allow you to unlock new skills. This mastery will give you a new weapon. This mastery will fundamentally change the way you're playing your character. Because that's not their, like, game space. That game space is specializations, you see, so there's a distinction there. What they will do at most is give you, like, passive stuff, like additional traits, I suppose, passive stuff that will, say, allow you to do more damage to certain enemies, even bypass stuff like advance. So that's one thing. They don't give you, like, double dodge. And when it comes to mobility as well, yes, they can change your capabilities of moving around the environment, but they're kind of environment specific. So gliding is the best example. When you're in the Maguma jungle, you can glide anywhere, and this really changes the way you play the game. But it is only in the jungle. It's not everywhere. It's not in World vs. World. It's not in PvP. It's not in all the everything you've ever played in Guild Wars 2 so far. And so it's kind of restricted in this way. It's not a core change to your profession. And then if you look at other stuff, it's even better examples of this, like the mushrooms, okay? Mushrooms, you could say, oh, they could add a mastery that allows you to double jump. All right, well, let's say that didn't break the game. Actually, if you think about the way that the mushrooms are working, you get the mastery and then you can press F on the mushroom and it allows you to jump really high. It's very similar. Like, that's the way they're doing it, but they're restricting where you get access to this new ability. So it's contextual new abilities and it's passives. And these are going to be impacting the hardcore content at the end. I think we're pretty clear with that. All right, so let's move on. Let's see what we've had so far. Now, in the previous betas, we had the two different sections. We had Heart of Maguma Masteries, we had Pact Tyria Masteries, and those were the only two sections. It seems, then, that what we can expect is with after Heart of Thorns, maybe they'll add new mastery tracks with the Living World. Maybe. But entire new sections will probably come with subsequent expansions. So the majority, or maybe even all of the masteries we see that will actually impact the Maguma jungle will be coming at the drop of the expansion. And then when another one comes that takes us to, say, the Crystal Desert, it will be, you know, the Crystal Wastes area or something, you know, and then those will be the masteries we get there. And they'll allow us to windsurf, and they'll allow us to wear goggles to protect ourselves from the mighty sandstorms that prevail there, and so on. All right, so let's look first at Pact Tyria, because this really isn't very much. This is actually where I'm expecting us to get a lot of information tomorrow and over the week. Specifically, they said on Periscope that the Friday live stream is going to have a lot of details. But so, Pact Tyria, I'm mostly excited about these masteries because it is everything about the PvE game we've played so far, and it would be nice to see a little bit more. But so far, one of them is only really about crafting. It isn't going to affect you in moment-to-moment gameplay at all. That's legendary precursor crafting. So we've got, the first tier is Revered Antiquarian, and this grants you access to collections. So already we can kind of speculate. This is such a wide open system that ArenaNet can say, oh, we're just going to add any number of masteries that unlock collections for you. Okay, that's fine. They may be a little bit boring in its implementation. But so this is directly tied to crafting. You get the first tier of precursor collections, second, third. These are called the Revered Antiquarian, the Magister of Legends, the Historian of the Armaments, and then last of all, you get Scholar of Maguma's Secrets. And this one sounds slightly different. This actually grants access to Heart of Thorns Maguma precursor collections. So it sounds like you're going to go through all of the classic precursors, and perhaps even now, as it has been revealed, the backpack precursor, and then we get the Heart of Thorns ones. So a further question I have here is what happens when we get even more precursors? The next expansion, do they get bundled into legendary precursor crafting? This mastery track here, it's just even deeper in the track. When we get legendary rings and earrings and all that other stuff, do they also get bundled in? Legendary armor, or do they become new ones? Maybe ArenaNet decided they don't really care about that just yet, and they'll decide later at the date because it could be so far off. But there you go, that's one of the Pact Tyria ones. The other one is Fractals. Fractals had a big update. I'll give you guys a link to the video on screen right now if you want to check that out. And unfortunately, despite all the information we had on Fractals, they didn't tell us what the balls the masteries were doing. The funny thing is about Fractals, though, is that they were kind of trying to accomplish what Masteries are trying to accomplish, except a long time ago. And what they were trying to do was implement a system in the game, Agony and Agony Resistance, that was an end game progression for you. You continued to build this up in your gear so that you could tackle harder and harder challenges that were basically just hard gates. It was ArenaNet saying you cannot do this unless you go through all the prerequisite stuff. And that's kind of what Masteries are. So now I wonder, because there are fractals tied to it, because they never mentioned Agony in that fractals patch, perhaps these fractal attunement masteries, so Follows Advice, Agony Channeler, Mistlock Singularities, Recursive Resourcing, Essential Singularities, and Hyperactive Singularities, all of which the details have been obscured by the mists for us. Will these perhaps actually just be a replacement for the Agony system? Though we did hear a statement that specifically referenced Agony before, so who knows. Alright, those are Pacteria. Will we get a couple more on this Wednesday? I would hope so, but again, I find it very hard to speculate as to what the hell they could do for just generic Tyria stuff. One thing for the future, I think is a very possible and exciting thought, is the way we gather items. Gathering kind of became a non-mechanic in Guild Wars 2. In some MMOs, you see gathering as a big part of the game. In fact, you can see a lot of MMOs have their economy structured thus that you have players who invest heavily in the gathering side of things, who provide the materials for the characters who invest heavily in the crafting side of things. Because these are so grindy, Guild Wars 2 doesn't want to be grindy, so this doesn't really happen with this game. But because in other MMOs these are so grindy, you get this cool balance where people are trading amongst one another in this way, and it's a nice system. But in those games, gathering has to be a little bit more usually than just pressing F on a node that respawns very frequently and buying some gear for, gems that will never run out. Gathering is, especially if you compare it to the state of crafting now, which is quite robust and has got a lot of stuff to do with it, very, very minor. So it would be quite obvious then to have a mastery where a mastery track where they say, okay, you can gather these high-level materials such that could even be used for new legendaries. Like we've already heard about, Dark Energy is going to be a new material for new legendaries. We have this new material or even new stat sets as well that they add into the game. And the only way you can interact with this node with your unlimited pick is you need the mastery to do it, otherwise it will return ruined ore. And I think that does make a lot of sense. More specifically, if that doesn't excite you guys very much, because it does just sound like a bit of a bland gate, you can add a bit of flavor in there to spice up, but think more specifically about new types of gathering. Maybe they don't do this with existing gathering, but maybe fishing will come to the game one day. Those of you unaware, there are no fish-based products you can do in cooking whatsoever. Why is that? Well, ArenaNet said they wanted to leave space for potential fishing. So if fishing ever did come into the game, and I don't necessarily think it would be Heart of Thorns, because this would have been one of those poster features. It would have been right there on the main trailer. Regardless of what people say about hardcore content, a lot of us do really like that casual content, and fishing would be wonderful for Guild Wars 2 if you could go to any body of water. I'm not going to turn this into a fishing video, but this is another great example of a place for the mastery. You learn new masteries. These allow you to catch different types of fish that you've been seeing in the water before, but you couldn't do anything. Allow you to equip better rods. Allow you to fish into different pools of water like bogs or fast-running streams and stuff like that. There's a lot you can do with fishing, and that is one of the only things, that and some other vague gathering concepts I can think of for Pacteria. Alright, then of course we have, further categories will probably come with further expansions. To talk about these for a little, a lot of us have toyed with the idea of an underwater expansion for a long time. Underwater content, in my opinion, in Guild Wars 2 is not actually that bad, especially if you compare it to other MMOs. The problem is, a lot of people like to create builds that have cool synergies with weapons that exist on land and runes and skills, and everything is kind of all land-based. And then when you go underwater, it just feels like a really stripped down experience. None of the other decisions you made really matter. Nothing's interacting in a super meaningful way. Though they do interact, like for an elementalist, you do get longer fire fields underwater and you can trait their cooldowns and stuff. But we don't do it very much. It's kind of clunky. There's no ground targeting. It's very difficult to do because of the no ground targeting. In many respects, it's hard to blast might and stuff like that. So the combat just feels slightly off. It's not terrible though. But this core idea that it's because it doesn't lock into much of the rest of the experience of the game. If they ever did do this fabled underwater expansion, of which, can I just say, I don't think will ever fully exist. I think we may have an expansion that has a focus on water combat, but it's never going to be permanently it. In an expansion focused purely on underwater, I think we might get one zone that is actually purely underwater. Everything else is going to have islands and land combat and stuff. It's just got to be that way. But this idea that it doesn't link into everything else, where you have a mastery. You have a mastery that can be trained on land or whatever, and slowly this allows you to dive deeper. And again, there's a plethora of different things you can put masteries in here. It's really easy to find inspiration for this idea. You know, slipstreams, currents that exist underwater, a lot of stuff we see that they have in their gliding track, we'll look at it in a second, and just basic things like, oh, you need this mastery to equip a better breather, because your current one, I'm sorry, it's going to break under the pressure. Or just generic things to say, you've got to train your lungs to be able to breathe out as you swim up, so that you don't succumb to the deep pressures below you. It gets very dark underwater. You can have stuff like night vision while underwater. Hell, night vision could be a mechanic in any expansion and be a mastery check of its own, as long as they made it interesting enough. So there's a lot for underwater. That's always been on my mind. And then, yes, you've got the Crystal Desert, windsurfing, sandstorms, the potential of riding Jinundu, as we saw in Nightfall. Those of you Guild Wars 1 players will know exactly what I mean there. As well as a whole bunch of new masteries around new races, cultures we meet there, languages to learn, and enemies to fight, how to penetrate their defenses, protect against our own. I wouldn't be surprised either if we see copy-pastes of Heart of Thorns stuff. You know, if there are mushrooms in the Heart of Thorns expansion that allow you to jump pretty high, I can expect a different kind of mushroom, and this would feel cheap. Maybe they can change it slightly, but a different type of mushroom when we go to Cantha, and we're in the Echo Forest, and we have masteries about learning how to climb around on the canopy and climb the trees and stuff. In fact, actually, just raw tree climbing would be really perfect for Guild Wars 2. When we get to the Echo Forest, they can design trees that specifically work for it. Just climbing in general, monkey swinging, stuff like that, because they were actually in some of the earliest design notes for Guild Wars 2, and then ended up getting cut really quickly, back when the game was going to have, every player was going to have a companion of their own and stuff. So that's the stuff I think is likely there. Alright, Heart of Thorns, moving on. No doubt these masteries have changed. We've seen them going through a lot of different iterations. We've seen entirely different UI be used for them. The earliest UI had this huge thing where you could bring the experience bar up. And so here we've got gliding, glider basics, gain access to the glider so that you can glide like a squirrel across the highest points of the Maguma jungle. This alone changed the experience of the betas significantly. I spent a long time wandering around the Itzel village, really having to maneuver my way across these thin paths and find my way out and in and to get to very specific areas, and it was a nightmare. In a good way. It was good. It was engaging. And then the second I got the glider, I was just sort of moving all over the place. It was fantastic. Then we got thick wings. With practice, we learned to treat the wings on our glider, strengthening their flaps, allowing you to stay in the air longer. Updraft use, improved design to your glider handles and slits in the wings let you confidently fly into updrafts, allowing a boost to your flight height and the ability to travel to never before reachable locations. So again, context-specific movement advantages we've got here. Next, there's stronger bindings. You learn to bind the wings of our glider for stronger binding strats. The result is longer glide times without tearing apart your wings. Now, though the description here is different, you'll notice that we've got learn how to do something, extend the amount of time we can do something, get something completely new with it, extend it again, and then we've got faster deploy wings. You can, through a series of high-tension springs and quick-release levers, you've rigged your glider to be able to deploy its wings more frequently. And then lastly, we end on Powerful Leap, which is after intensive leg training, you've learned to boost yourself into your glide with far greater force. So what they've actually done is they've copied up on two of them. They've said, all right, you can get it longer, now you can get it even longer. So what they've done is they've designed this new thing we can get through a mastery with its limitations, and then many of the masteries are actually removing those limitations. We've also heard since then with the data mining, as I mentioned in a previous video, you've got stealth gliding now and ley line gliding. And I think that's important because the one thing that's disappointing me a bit about these masteries right now is they don't have many meaningful tiers. I think the more tiers you can give them, the more comfortably you can make them longer to finish, and people won't complain about grind. And I think it's very important these take a long time to finish. In fact, if you guys take anything from this video and wanted to have any discussion in the comments, I would love to hear what you guys think is a good amount of time to finish a mastery. Because I think we're going to have a lot of QQ, specifically this beta coming up, where people are saying, oh, they're too difficult to finish. And I'm just thinking, okay, I'm thinking long term. I want to have stuff to do. I want meaningful progression on my account 6 months after Heart of Thorns or more. I really want to still be invested in that game. I want it to capture that audience. I want us all to be captured by it, and I want it to be fun. So I am a player that has never minded a little bit of grind here and there, but I think this is really, really, really important, especially considering ArenaNet chose to make these account bound, not character bound. It means that if they get the numbers off, people's accounts are just ruined straight away. They won't retroactively make them take longer, and this could even set a precedent where they're scared to do it with future expansions as well. So that's something that very much concerns me. Then we've got Exalted Lore and Itzel Lore. I won't read every one of these because the video's been going on for a long time, but here's some more of the combat-based stuff here now. So these are people that we learn to interact with, and then they teach us stuff about the environment. So the Exalted teach us how to combat the Mordrum, and it reduces condition duration on us, or totally unique Mordrum conditions hit us but do way less damage, very similar to, for example, Spectral Agony and Infusions worked in Guild Wars 1. In addition, there is also learning how to pierce through Mordrum bark, which makes them weak to your attacks. So it's like the Exalted are paired with one specific enemy, and then the Itzel, on the other hand, are paired with another specific enemy. Then they kind of filter in some other things as well. There's gaining access to entire new areas. You remember when Guild Wars 2 launched and they had a cool idea with Skritzberg in Brisbane Wildlands, and they were like, oh, we can have this entire place that's locked off to players until they do all these events. And they had this cool idea of locking a city off, and then eventually you gain access to it. And they thought they could tie it to the dynamic event system, which was new and fresh and exciting for them. It didn't quite work. We all know that didn't quite work. Well, now this is kind of their opportunity to try Skritzberg 2.0, with the Forgotten City. And then even beyond that, you can unlock further stuff deeper in the city, like the ability to get their finest treasures every day and, challenge the champion. So more like daily tide stuff, which is very, very cool. And then, of course, thinking of the hardcore content, at the end of the Exalted, you get Wyvern Defiance. Now, this is at the end, okay? And this is the Exalted that taught you to stand in defiance of Wyverns. They can no longer knock you down with wing buffets. So let's say we do get long instances with difficult foes, and let's say there's a boss fight where there's like 7 Wyverns. Obviously, the group of players who are maxed out on their Exalted Mastery are going to be the ones that get through that. And so this is a little bit like how in other MMOs you kind of get these attunement processes, and you get these lengthy requirements for people to be able to complete raids that really aren't based on people's skill so much, but they're based on people completing a large amount of prior things. And it seems like ArenaNet doing that. I've got no problem with that, again, because I like that it puts a lot of emphasis on staying in the game and unlocking this stuff, but I just hope ArenaNet don't weigh too heavily on this as their difficulty. I hope that when they design this hardcore content, they explicitly design it around a team of people that have all the masteries they wanted to be mastered for that environment. So if they created a dungeon, okay, a really difficult dungeon, a raid, and they said, all right, we want players to really be able to do this, to have max Wyvern and max Itzel. So they filter the dungeon with those specific types of enemies, and then they start triggering whether it's hard or not. They don't tone it down because they want people without the max masteries to be able to finish it. Not only does that make the content in the very end for the true veterans boring and less engaging than it could be, but it also allows people to shortcut stuff and leave the game quicker. And so I really see no perks there, and I hope that they avoid doing that. All right, so we've got Itzel and Nuhawk, and then lastly mushrooms. Mushrooms being again a little bit like the gliding. So you've got the bouncing mushrooms. These allow you to move to new areas. That's just kind of like a hard gate. They don't always use soft gates. Some of these situations here, it was like this enemy's invulnerable unless you get the mastery. And I never really liked that too much. I like the idea of being able to really struggle against a foe or a challenge, really struggle, but eventually be forced away or succeed, and then actually come back later with the mastery and be able to own it. I think that feels a lot more fun than just, oh, this guy's invulnerable, I guess I'll leave until I come back later. Because then it feels just like an arbitrary gate. But if you don't do the invulnerability thing, it feels a lot more fun. Maybe that's just me personally. But so mushroom laws are, though they're not revolving around combat, they're very much like this. Bouncing mushrooms, instead of it being like, this place is just insanely difficult to get up because it's this horrible jumping puzzle, it's just you cannot get up unless you have the bouncing mushroom. Now, because it's a tier 1 mastery and because it's unfeasible to put insanely difficult jumping puzzles everywhere that people can skip with bouncing mushrooms, which is just something I don't really agree with in many other respects, I'm happy that they did this with bouncing mushrooms. And then you've got further stuff here. So you can ingest speed increasing mushrooms. You've got stuff that tweaks your adrenal gland, giving you a surge of adrenaline and instantly refreshing your skills. So this does impact combat in a bigger way, your class in a bigger way, but again, it's very specific to a very specific area and finding these special mushrooms. And again, you can imagine a very difficult boss where a couple of these mushrooms spawn during the fight, and you want to make sure that, and only a couple of people in your entire group can maybe eat them. You want to make sure that they're the right people, and you want to make sure that they have the mastery to be able to do so. Now, you get healing mushrooms as well. Think about a big room full of damage, but also loads of these mushrooms. You need this mastery to be able to, actually wade through. Think of just an entire dungeon scenario where you're constantly affected by massive degen. Maybe your heal skill doesn't even work, but the mushrooms do, and so there you go. They've got Master Forager. This one's an interesting one. The idea is that it's easier to see mushrooms around you, and they become more visible on your map. I like that, because when you're exploring old areas again, you're going to see stuff you didn't see before, and it will make it feel a bit more rewarding to go back through those places, especially on alternate characters. And then the last one is massive bouncing mushrooms. So they take the idea of the first bouncing mushrooms, and then they just amplify it. You can use the massive ones to bounce really far through the air, and then maybe the discussion I had and the arguments I had on bouncing mushrooms in the initial instance kind of makes sense here. But there you go, guys. That's everything about Masteries. We'll get a lot more news on this later on in this week, very soon. I'll let you guys know exactly what they say. We'll do some more discussion. Let me know where you are. As you can tell from this video, you know, I just sat down to ramble about it here without very much prep at all, and there's a lot of different discussions going on. So let's have a talk about it. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you tomorrow.